Welcome to Killer Psychologist. I'm Dana Anderson, a forensic psychologist and your host of the show. Killer Psychologist is for true crime fanatics and anyone intrigued with the dark side of psychology. Welcome to Killer Psychologist. I'm your host, Dana Anderson. We have an all-star lineup today. Of course, Dr. Craig Wetterer, Eric Zelaya, and we have somebody new on today, Jerry Lyons, who I'm excited to hear from. World-renowned investigator who's been involved in cases like Casey Anthony. So Eric invited him here today. So I'm really excited. We have so much we could talk about. And Eric and I have covered a few cases in the past that we kind of wanted to follow up on today. We have Gypsy Rose, Micah Miller, and Kayla Ciego. And one of the things that we were discussing is that a lot of people can become so involved in these cases that they become emotionally involved and want to believe that it happened differently. Or they become delusional. And we know this because we work on some of these cases in real life, but we covered a few of these cases on the podcast. And some people lost their ever-loving minds. And while Eric, for example, is a real private investigator doing this for his job, and people on TikTok are not. And they want to believe something else happened in this case. And when they become so emotionally attached to what they believe happened, that they can't really accept the truth. And the problem is it creates widespread misinformation, and which is not helpful to the case. But I want to hear from Jerry, your experience dealing with the public. And I don't know if you're on TikTok or other forms of social media, but you are now.
I am now.
Yeah.
So I just, you mentioned the Casey Anthony case, and she was the most hated woman in the world. And I would knock on doors to people who were supposedly witnesses, and they would spit at me. They would want, how could you defend her? And I would tell them that because they all found her guilty. They all found her guilty. There was some woman on late night TV. She had some show, and she kept calling her tot mom. And every night she convinced the public. And this woman used to be a prosecutor. And every night she would convince the public that Casey was guilty as sin. And let's skip the trial. Let's kill her now. And so when I would go to try to talk to people, they already figured that she was guilty. And why we going through the trial? Why are we wasting everybody's time? Let's just find her guilty and kill her. And I would have to explain to them that I'm doing nothing. I was a police detective in New York. You can probably tell by the voice. And all I do is look for the truth. And I would try to explain to them, listen, I don't defend anybody. My job isn't to defend. My job is to find the truth. And that's what I would do. I would just try to find the truth. But man, they already had their minds made up. I talked to one guy who just went on forever. He was very pompous. He was part of that search party that came from another state to look for Kaylee, and he was very pompous. And then, because he just wanted to hear himself talk, and I let him talk. If you want to talk, like you're letting me now, but if you want to talk, I'm going to let you talk because I never know what you're going to say, and it could be gold. So he talked about taking a motorcycle and going down to where Kaylee's body was eventually found, and he never saw it there. And then when he realized that he said too much, he really did. When he realized he said too much, he went to the cops and accused me of twisting his words. And I didn't twist his words. I just stood there and listened. But he had an agenda, and the agenda wasn't Casey or justice.
Yeah. Craig Wetterer, I want to hear from you some of the psychological aspects of people becoming so emotionally involved in these cases, or just even their ego, as Jerry just described, of they just come up with a certain opinion they want to have, and they're not actually looking for justice or the truth.
Yeah, no, this is an interesting area. Now, what you spoke to, I think probably the most salient bias that comes to mind. So this is the cognitive biases that we know in the social, science literature. So it's confirmation bias is what Jerry was talking about. This guy, and again, using this as an illustration, likely had this preconception or this belief about guilt, right? Her guilt. And so when someone has that belief system in place or that pre-existing belief system in place, it really does bias the way in which you think about, frame, or recall. So this can impact memory because, again, this goes into memory because memory is reconstructive, right? So, memory is not a videotape. So when people are sort of, especially around witnesses, when we're talking to witnesses, oftentimes when they're recalling events that they witnessed or saw days, weeks, or even months or years sometimes prior, these are oftentimes inherently unreliable, and it's because of those biases, that play a role in that. Oftentimes, biases will play a role. Confirmation bias is just one of them. But you also asked me to talk about maybe some personality traits that might impact this as well, right? So we know that some personality disorders, particularly in clinical psych, we talk about the cluster B, which was an older term, but these are people who maybe have histrionic, features to their personality. These are people that like to be the center of attention. They want to be, in the spotlight. And those are the folks that we also have to watch out for because, again, those traits can intersect and can impact how they are recalling events. So there's a lot of dynamics involved, right? When we're talking about, especially when we're talking about, witness recall and people who perhaps think they saw something or heard something or whatever that that when they go to tell a law enforcement investigator or a private investigator that that is all subject to all the biases that all humans inherently have. All humans are biased, right? So that's kind of my initial take on that. I don't know if you have anything you want to follow up on with it.
The thing is, I don't remember. I mean, Jerry, you'd probably know better than anybody else. I mean, granted, there was no social media back when you were a detective. And I feel like the more social media grows, the more these issues come out where, people are taking, first off, the true crime community is great. Don't get me wrong. I mean, there's a lot of great people out there in the true crime community. I mean, first off, we're all considered part of the true crime community. But I think you have professionals and then you've got, I don't want to use the word amateurs because that sounds derogatory. But, you've got everybody, and I think they want to help. Everybody wants to help. I think it's they want to help. But I think the problem that you start getting is you've got these people that have biases. And then they take these biases, or they take, they look at something and either they're just easily manipulated or, they just don't want to research, or, they just see something that just, it aligns with their viewpoint. They just take that, they run with it. And then you have this train crash reaction effect where you have a case and then you have all this misinformation that's coming out because you have all these people that come up with these strange biases and all this stuff. And I feel like as social media grows and grows and grows, this problem with in regards to cases is only going to get worse. Is it going to get to a point where, are you going to have to worry about third-party interference in every major case because of social media?
Well, not here. I'll throw this out at you, Eric. What about this? What about the deep fakes and the AI generated content that could create misinformation campaigns, right? I mean, this is the future that we're facing, right? In terms of getting the right information out or not getting the right information out. And, just think about that. That's going to, I'm very concerned about that.
Yeah. I mean, you can easily take, somebody who has a following on social media can easily take any number of true crime stories, take any number of public records, alter those public records to fit whatever narrative they want to do, and you can spread that out there, and people would believe it. And how do you prove it wrong unless you take it upon yourself to do a FOIA request, to prove it wrong? But who has time to do all of that? Nobody. And I think that's what it is. First off, I think people just we like convenience, or we like social media. We like to have things now. people want investigation solved now. They want the news, the tea, they want it now. So I think I think there are people that are just nefarious that kind of market towards that. And, that's a great, I don't know if it's happened yet, but that's a scary idea that anybody could take any public record and you can twist the narrative, to fit it to whatever story you want to attract whoever you want it to attract.
Yeah, I don't know if you played around with some of the technologies that are emerging. And I don't know if we can, I guess we can talk about different, not ChatGPT specifically, but I'll give you an example. There's a new generative AI product that's available called Hedra. It's publicly available. You can try it for free as a beta and all that stuff. And you can literally take a still photograph of anybody that you can capture on the internet. You can turn that into a video. If you capture a sampling of that individual's voice, you can create text and you can generate a video from that static photograph approximates that person, that reality of that person talking. And so, that's where the deep fakes are coming from. But when we think about like anything happening if you look at what's happening over in the United Kingdom right now with all of the riots, there was initially some misinformation, I think, that got out, right? It wasn't entirely true, but you got just an inkling of misinformation triggered this cascade of rioting and rage and all of this stuff. And so, this is potentially a big problem, a big issue. And hopefully we'll have some way to counter this.
I think that's important too, when we talk about, social media, and we talk about true crime, and we talk about and Gypsy and all these other cases, we talk about misinformation, but I think that's important as well, as people don't realize that, granted, the laws in the UK are a little different than here in the United States, but the reason people got arrested in the UK isn't because they were just speaking freely. They were spreading information that was causing the death and destruction of personal property and other people, and that's where it becomes a crime. And, and again, I think we've talked about this many, many times before, where people just, they just get so emotionally involved in these cases, or these topics or these things, and they start stalking people or harassing people, also the crazy stuff, not realizing the repercussions of, you can easily get charged, you can get arrested, you can end up with slapped with a civil suit. It's a lot of things, and all it takes is that one person for you to tee off, and I think people don't realize that. And again, we talk about, they just get so emotionally wrapped up in these cases, but why?
I have a relative who's heavy she likes crime, and she's Scott Peterson right now. She's all over the Scott Peterson case. Yeah, Dana, I know. She's almost, and she doesn't think he did it, and she's all over it, and she calls me constantly, and it's just crazy. And you know what happens? People get a feeling. They get a feeling. Like emotion. That's a feeling, right? And so they get a feeling about something, and then all of a sudden they latch onto something that reinforces that feeling, whether it be true or not, but it reinforces that feeling.
Yeah.
When I was a detective, I would work with guys. We'd be investigating the case, and somebody would say, "You know what I think?" And I would say, "I don't care what you think. I don't care," because that's a feeling, right? And I would say, "Well, what do you base these thoughts on? Is it, this is what I think happened." Well, based on what? Based on what? And we have to go back to whatever we're basing this stuff on. And I agree, Dr. Craig, that today with AI and the way you could we go through this right now in our political world, which drives me crazy. But with AI, somebody manipulates this, that, or the other thing. And then all of a sudden, and then you get somebody who might have a podcast, say, and they get a following, and they say something that they believe. And now all these people, now they believe it too. And not because they saw any evidence, but because they heard it on a podcast. And it's It's troubling, and I wonder what the future is going to be like with this.
And that's why I always, and I think I said it before, and Jerry, you've heard me say it before, and I think you've taught me the same thing. You allow the evidence to shape your theories. And Craig said, we all have a bias. Now, when you're an investigator, you have to put that bias aside. How do you do that? By investigating based on evidence. That's how you get rid of your bias, by investigating based on the evidence. You allow the evidence to shape your theories. Well, guess what's not evidence? Your feelings are not evidence. Emotions are not evidence. A piece of paper is not evidence. Something you read on the internet is not evidence. What Jerry tells me is not evidence.
But it's true.
It must be true. None of that is evidence.
You got to follow the case. You got to follow the case instead of the case following you.
Not your emotion, not your heart, not your feelings, because that doesn't solve cases.
I do have to say this, though, because Jerry this will resonate with you. You were a detective. Many years, you were probably a detective. I was an investigator.
Can you tell by his hair? Many years.
Yeah, right. But I can tell you that one of the things that I, in the years that I was investigating when I was a police officer, and if you've had this happen, you've got a defendant, you've got a suspect in front of you, you're in an interview room, and you've got this gut feeling that, this guy is guilty, right? In other words, your gut is telling you this. So I always, and again, we know this from, again, the science. So I'm going to bring the science into this. Your gut. So your brain and your gut are connected. So I don't know if sometimes people don't know this. We actually have more serotonin receptors in our gut than we do in the brain. And so when your gut is sort of speaking, I know it's intuitive and I know it's a feeling, it's a sense. You don't necessarily ignore it, okay? But you use it, you use that to then find confirmatory evidence or facts, right? You're looking for facts to support that. But at the same time, you want to always keep that open mind that we've talked about that before, where you always want to look at, well, what's disconfirming, what's dispositive, what evidence would suggest that this person in front of me perhaps did not commit this crime. So it's like looking at it from both sides is so critical, right? And we've talked about how there are investigators out there, and I saw this in the years that I worked, that they don't have that. They're sort of one-sided. They start with a conclusion about the guilt of somebody, and then they work to, again, that's where confirmation bias comes in, right? They only look for the evidence or facts to support that confirmation or to confirm that conclusion that they've arrived at. And that's the crux of the problem when you're investigating something, is you forget to look at the dispositive stuff, the things that don't confirm, right?
When I first became a detective, about a little over 100 years ago, but when I first became a detective, we were taught that our job was to, say, arrest or convict the guilty, exonerate the innocent. And I think too many people today forget about the second part, about exonerating the innocent. The whole thing is to get the right person. It doesn't serve anybody what good is it to arrest the wrong person? It's just, you might get credit for an arrest, or whenever, but the person who did that crime is still out there, is still out there. So these people who manipulate confessions or do other things, I have to tell you this, in New York, down in Florida, we, and other states too, they go by photo ID, right? You pick somebody out of a photo lineup. That's the guy. Man, I tell you what, I can't identify you out of a photo lineup, and I'm looking at you right now. And I had a case one time. I'll give you two example of two cases where a lady, misidentification is what I'm getting at. I had, I show in New York, we do lineups where right now, right, you pick out a photo of a guy, you say, yeah, that looks like the guy. I never say, are you sure? Because you can't be sure, right? In New York, the next thing we do is I go out and I find that guy, I get him, I take him in, I put him in a lineup, right? Now, that the person who's the victim of the crime is looking through a window, right? They can't see her, she can see him. And I mean, maybe within 10 feet, you got 6 people and you got to pick out the person. And this one time, this lady said to me, number 2 is the guy whose picture I picked out, but he's not the guy who robbed me. So now, if we just went by the picture, that guy be in jail, right?
That's a big problem. And that, again, witness misidentification is a huge issue. And there's research that speaks to this for sure.
Right.
I mean,
the Innocence Project.
Exactly. And but there's a lot of cases in which, and I had the same thing happen, where you give a 6-pack to someone. We call it a 6-pack, which is a photo lineup where you look for similar. You usually use DMV photos or pull from a DMV database, so you have similar backgrounds, all of that stuff. And even though we would give an admonishment, right, that they're not under any obligation to identify and all those things, which but based on the case, all you have to do. There were cases in which this person was misidentified, and then of course later, we confirmed that it was a misidentification because we had DNA evidence that then ruled that person out. But if you don't have, that's why it's the same thing with eyewitness identification. So the work of Elizabeth Loftus speaks to this. She's done a lot of research looking at the reliability of eyewitness testimony and witnesses, and unfortunately, eyewitness testimony and is actually inherently unreliable. So from a legal standpoint, as an attorney, I look at, if I have a witness statement and say a witness has ID'd somebody as committing whatever it is, a robbery, my assumption is that person's recollection of the events and their identification is inherently unreliable. That's what I start with, right? And they have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that is.
So the victim has to prove.
The victim, yeah. And so it's something that I think people. So if a case just relies on a witness identification only, that's a weak case where you don't have
100%
other corroborative data evidence to link that suspect to the crime. And I've seen cases prosecuted where that's all they've got is a witness ID, right? And I don't know if you've seen that in New York, but I saw it, and
they'll convict on that.
They will. I mean, and it can happen, and that can be troubling just because of what I know about the unreliability of
right. But that's why it's so important. When I was a detective, to me it was important to get a confession because 2 reasons. Number one, I want to make sure I have the right guy. That's number 2. I think it's easier for a jury to convict if the guy says, "Yeah, I did it." But one of the things I always insist on, they have to tell me about the crime. Yeah, they have to tell me. I had one time in Lower Manhattan, I was a brand new detective, and I had a guy, the anti-crime people brought him in, and I'm talking to him, and he confessed to several robberies and a rape. All right, but there was certain things he couldn't get aroused, so he made the victim, the woman, perform oral sex on him. All right. And he told me this. So I knew I had the right guy, right? Because he told me this, not just the woman, not just the victim, but he told me this. So I knew I had the right guy when he
said. Yeah, and that's the key right there is those specific case facts that only the perpetrator would know about. Then especially if it's coupled with a confession, then you've got this. I've got this rock solid, right? Because we do know that in rare cases confessions can be coerced, and some depending on the person's suggestibility and their cognitive capacities and that kind of stuff. Although that I think that's rare, but it can happen. So when you get those case facts, when they tell you about specific things like at this crime scene that only that person knows about, then you've got good solid evidence.
But that's the way it should be, isn't it?
Yeah, right.
I mean, it's not just I did it. You're right, I did it. It should be how did you do it? Should be how did you do it? I had another case where the victim got shot, and he couldn't make an ID. So I put the victim in a room, in the lineup room. Just told him to sit around in there. I brought the shooter or the guy I had into the other room, and I had him look through the window, and he said, "Yeah, that's the guy I shot." So I had a cross identify, the district attorney, it was a Queens case. Then they're not as good as Manhattan. But anyway, it was a Queens case, and he said, "Oh, that's pretty tricky." What's tricky? We got an identification, right? So,
and that's key. And we kind of talked about the last podcast. Craig, you weren't here, but Dana and I talked about it. Regards to Gypsy, in regard to like the confession. We talked about the confession and being easily manipulated, and how it's believed that both Nicholas and Gypsy may have had some mental health problems. But again, we have, this goes back to the heart of things, where again we don't have all these cases that come out. We have public records, but we don't have all of the records. We don't have all these psych records. We talked about cases before, and we've mentioned Nikki's case in California and Mike and Miller case in South Carolina. We've mentioned cases here in Florida and all over the place. And people follow these cases very, very closely. And again, I talk about people want information, and they don't realize that they're not entitled to certain things. Like, people feel like they're entitled to Gypsy and Nicholas's like mental health record. They feel like they're entitled to their medical records. In the Micah Miller case, people feel like they're entitled to know everything that's happened in, their marriage, or, in both their mental health issues. Like, people are not entitled to any of that. People have personal lives. And just because true crime carries over to social media doesn't mean people should have a right to go into somebody's personal life. I mean, and that's the thing, is like, even when Jerry and I do our investigations, even when we talk about cases on social media, we never disclose anything personal about anything that we're doing, because people have an expectation of privacy. And, and I think the general public forgets all of that, and I think, and we talked about, before all this, we were talking about, before we even jumped on the podcast, I know Dana and I were talking about, the victim and villain mentality, where people then choose sides. Like, they choose, like, well, somebody, either they have to be a victim or they're a villain, not realizing that somebody can be both. I see Dan getting ready to say something. Interject. I'm just rambling at this point, because I'm like, when I get on a topic, like, I just start going.
Well, I think the victim and the villain, that sort of that duality is something that I don't know, Dana. Do you want to speak to that? Because from a psychological perspective, we can certainly see this happen. I mean, Gypsy Rose is a prime example of that.
Well, as psychologists, we see their complete psychological record, and it's very revealing. And so, like you said, in the Gypsy Rose case, all that information the public doesn't have access to, and they're making assumptions about her. Okay. And in Micah Miller case, people made a lot of assumptions. If, like, she's a victim of domestic violence, then she's 100% a victim, instead of, now there's information about her having mental health issues or psychosis, then people became offended and reject that entirely. Well, so there's something called attribution bias, where people can make assumptions about, like, the motives of people. And so you don't always know the motives of someone. And I noticed that people really Eric had to actually, he got involved in the Micah Miller case, but people became so emotionally attached to what they believe happened to her that when faced with new evidence and information, Eric, they just not only rejected it, but tell me what their response was.
Well, I mean, and again, for the Micah Miller case, we were, it was one of the cases that we had just seen, and, we're like, we'll look into it, for the family. And I had been in contact with the family, and we were looking into it, but we had to take a step back completely, because it went crazy, because, people get so emotionally involved with stuff, and they just start getting involved with social media drama and spreading rumors and then attacking people. And, when you're a professional in the true crime community, you become a target, unfortunately. And I hate to, Jerry knows. Jerry did it with Casey Anthony. I mean, there's forums where Jerry's the topic of the forums, and then it happens in every single case. And not just Micah Miller case, not just Nikki's case, but it happens in every single case, but unfortunately, it's like, you look into a case, you can't help it, you can't do anything much, you can't do anything else to assist with it, or whatever it may be. And I always tell people, like, look, one way or the other, whether you look into a case and you agree with the opinion or you don't agree with it, somebody is going to hate me for the decisions that I make. When Jerry and I investigate a case, whatever we find out, somebody's going to hate whatever we find out, one way or the other. It's just a part of life. It's a part of investigating. When you're a detective and you're working a homicide and you investigate the case and you make an arrest, somebody's going to hate your decision. It's just part of your job. But to carry it over, and this is a term that I've seen on Facebook, to make it real life. And that's the thing, is people take this stuff on social media and they turn it real life. They make it personal. They turn all this stuff about them. Like, they take somebody else's case and they turn it about them,
So I'd like to comment to that, because I just got my first 1-star rating for the podcast last week.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm killing it. So yeah,
Did you take it out, put it on your fridge?
Yeah. So what happened was, it was the last episode Eric and I did. Someone got emotionally invoked about the information about Gypsy Rose. We didn't provide any new information. There is no new. This is the crime occurred many years ago, and we just were discussing the case, and we talked about some of the things that may have not been mitigating or may have been incriminating, or just her sentence. She got out. People disagree with it. They want her back in prison. There's nothing we can do about that. She didn't go to jury trial. And we talked about the case, but somebody got really emotionally involved, started messaging me all these things, saying Gypsy Rose was never a victim. There was never Munchausen syndrome by proxy. Gypsy needs to go back to prison, all these different things. They become posting all these things on TikTok and then messaging me saying I lied, all this stuff. And so I ended up just being like, I don't have time, and just blocked them, because I really don't have time for that. And then they went and retaliated, gave me a 1-star review for the podcast. So it was just an example of like how emotionally unstable that person was. And they were too invested in a case, and they couldn't actually even listen. They just kind of lost their mind. And I thought, I don't even really have that kind of time. We're actually working real cases and doing things during the day, and we're trying to bring education to these topics. And I thought, that's a good example of somebody that has way too much time on their hands.
People want drama. Like, they don't, I shouldn't say they don't all. A lot of people like education. I mean, there's a lot of people that are on TikTok that enjoy the education, but some just want drama. That's why, I had to step out of a case because of drama, because I'm not going to involve myself in a case that's going to be, full of drama, drama everywhere. But unfortunately, that's what people are just so focused on, because they can't separate, fact from reality and real life from, emotions.
Hold that thought, drama, Eric, because you're using the word drama. And I'm glad you brought that up, because the core sort of feature of personality, when we talk about personality pathology on the pathological side of personality, is drawing people into their dramas. And so if that's one thing that, the viewers of the show could take away, when you learn about relationships and dealing with people in cases like what we're talking about, oftentimes when someone doesn't have a good cohesive sense of who they are, and they maybe have some personality pathology, they will inevitably create a situation where they're creating a drama, and they're going to pull you into that drama. That's how they get validated. That's how they there's all kinds of psychodynamic things we could talk about, but I don't want to go into all that depth. But just think about it that way. I'm glad you brought up drama, because what you want to do to avoid that, if you notice that about people that are trying to pull you into their dramas, is recognize, okay, this person is like, there's something going on personality wise with this person. I need to back myself out of this, right? And that's a key thing that we look at as psychologists. We're starting to see people that we have patients sometimes, we're treating different disorders, and I see patients all the time, and it's, oh boy, I'm seeing some narcissistic or histrionic stuff going on here. This is the stuff we call our cluster B stuff. And those involve lots of dramas. Borderline personality pathology is a similar type of thing where lots of drama, and they will pull you into that and make you part of it. And so the goal is to get, is to distance yourself from that, because you're not going to win it with them, right? Because they don't recognize what they're doing. It's they don't have any insight into this part of themselves that is clearly they're not functioning well in most cases.
Yep.
That's just a general statement. I'm not speaking to, your commenter on, the podcast or anything, because we don't know anything about that person, but I'm just talking about, in general, right? Like it's all about the dramas.
And I think that's the thing. And the thing that makes probably Gypsy's case most probably interesting to a lot of people is because of like the psychological backstory to it. And I think that's what probably drew a lot of people in, because again, we talk about the villain and the victim thing that we're talking about. And, some people will see the victim and some people will see the villain, but in all reality, again, you can look at somebody and see both if both exist, or you can look at them and just see one of the other. But people don't have to choose a side. Like, you don't have to look at a case and like pick a side. Like, you don't have to be like pro victim or pro villain. Like, you don't have to pick a side. You can look at a case and be non-biased, but again, like you said, people just enjoy the drama. But I do want to talk about Son of Sam Law, and I want to talk about Double Jeopardy, because I know, well, you weren't here the last podcast. It's just me and Dana. It was all lonely, and we just talked, and
Dana, you had nobody to talk to.
Yeah, I know. She had nobody to talk to.
We were with each other, but it was so lonely.
I was stuck. I think I was stuck in, I don't know, Napa wine tasting. I'm not sure what I was doing.
Wine tasting.
No, I was doing something. I don't remember.
You use that word stuck.
I was stuck doing something that was, I don't remember now. Now my memory. This is the whole problem with memory. I can't remember.
One of the biggest questions I've gotten on TikTok about Gypsy Rose, and again, I'm always fascinated with her case, of course, because of the death investigation aspect of it. Because, there are a lot of questions about the death investigation that I probably even still have, just because I haven't seen the full report yet, and I can't give an opinion on her case until I see the full report, because this is not how I operate, but there are questions that I think we can answer, because you're an attorney, and I think people love those kind of things. And that is, one, a lot of people always ask about Son of Sam Law, and they always ask, well, Gypsy is a convicted murderer, because look, let's face it, she was convicted of murder, whether or not she stabbed anybody or not. She enlisted the help of somebody else to commit a homicide. That is no different than Charles Manson. She's a convicted murderer. A lot of people ask, well, how is she profiting off of her crime? Doesn't the Son of Sam Law apply? Well, Dr. Craig, what do you have to say?
Well, it gets complicated, right? So I think, and Jerry's from New York, so the Son of Sam Law was, if I'm not mistaken, was a statute. It was a state statute that was passed back in the late 1970s. That was, a product of this this prolific serial killer, Son of Sam, right? And so that statute actually was ruled unconstitutional as overbroad in the Simon Schuster case. The U.S. Supreme Court actually overturned that. So, and this was on First Amendment grounds. So the issue in some of these statutory schemes is that, we do have this Constitution, right? And we have the right of free speech. So what was at issue in this case, in terms of that particular statute, is that the statute was deemed overbroad. In other words, it infringed upon someone's First Amendment right of free speech. And so, a statute has to be narrowly tailored, particularly when you have anything that's going to trigger, a First Amendment sort of right? So if it's not narrowly tailored enough, then it'll get overturned. And often we see this happen a lot, right? So I'm not sure if New York revised the statute or enacted any new statute. And these are generally victim compensation sort of statutes. So it's not that you can't have those. They just the statutes have to be very narrowly tailored, right, so that they conform with the Constitution, right? So that's kind of my take on that. And so there are several states that have these statutes in place that they essentially bar profiting from the crime that was committed. So like in Gypsy Rose's case, it would be, if she was to sell maybe rights to a film or, a book or something like that, she could potentially be, banned from getting any recovery. But I think the problem in her particular case, and we can talk about that, is that the victim in this case is deceased, right? So that creates its own, unique set of problems or facts that, again, if this was if the state was to try to go after her, right, to recover, how are they going to recover? Who are they recovering for? And would that be constitutionally permissible? Right? Does that make sense? I don't know.
Can I ask you a crazy question?
Look, I'm not a constitutional lawyer, so let me get that clear. I'm no expert in constitutional law. I am an attorney, right? But that doesn't mean I know, everything there is to know about the Constitution. In fact, it's been a long time since I've taken constitutional law. And so, again, memory, we forget stuff, over time.
Can I ask you a crazy question?
Sure.
And it has to do with Gypsy there, all right? Before she was a villain, she was a victim, right? Now, to me, she was a victim who became a villain who was smart enough to make a 10-year deal and is now out of jail.
Yeah.
But anyway, so we look at her and we're talking about this, whatever, making money on anything because she's a villain. What if she just wrote a book about being a victim? This is what my mother did or something. But you understand, I mean, she was both. She was both a victim and a villain. She went from one V to another. And so how do we talk about that?
That's a great,
how do we talk about that? And wouldn't that then become, I mean, I guess it doesn't become a crime of passion if you plan it, but can you plan a crime of passion if you're being beat down? You know what I'm saying? Or, so I this is a little bit, I think, deeper or more involved than just laying this out on the surface.
Yeah, that's a great question, because this is very nuanced in the sense that we don't have just a clear-cut case where, this is someone who, for example, let's just say it was Son of Sam, right? Like, or Jeffrey Dahmer or any of these like high-profile prolific serial killers who, ended up, writing a book or sold their rights to a movie. I know there's a lot of movies that have been made. But in this instance, she was a victim, right? So I think, again, if the state were to, was this Minnesota where she was at, or Missouri? So Missouri likely has a statute, a victim, compensation or recovery sort of statute, like a lot of states do. They would have to, this is just an opinion now, they would probably have a difficult time if that was what the scope of her, say her selling her rights to, like, was, I want to tell my story about my life of being a victim as a child, right? Through this Munchausen by proxy, which is what was alleged, right? And if so in that context, that statute probably would not apply to her. I mean, I guess this is just an opinion. But where do we draw the line in that? Like, how does that then cross over into, then the crime that was committed, right? Where she elicited her boyfriend, to commit this murder. And that's where I think it gets, we get into a little bit of a gray area. So I think, again, it would be one of these things that there would be some challenges, like, for example, if she was to do this, and then the state of Missouri, attempted to file motions with the court to enact those statutes and, prevent her or to force her through these civil mechanism, essentially, for any of the funds that were what we would probably call ill-gotten gains, I guess, in a certain sense. But anyway, the funds from any sort of sale of intellectual property rights would then go to this recovery fund. would probably get challenged, and the courts are going to have to figure that out, right? So that's where a judicial process where judge is going to have to interpret the statute, look at the facts, apply those facts to the statute, see whether or not, hey, could we actually enforce this? And so I'm not sure if they could. Like that would be a tough one, I think.
Yeah. She could write a book about being a victim and then end it by saying to be continued. And she never goes into
perhaps, right. And I don't know. What does Eric think?
Not to throw a wrench in any of this and stir the pot, but this could be a whole other topic for another podcast. But again, we don't know every little thing that happened. And we talk about potentially her being a victim. But is it also possible that maybe this was, could it have been just a really clever defense strategy?
Good point. Don't know. I mean, right? I mean, I don't know. I mean, I wasn't intimate.
No, because they would have to talk to witnesses, people who went through her life ever since she was a baby. This happened for a long time.
Jerry. We don't even know.
What?
She took a plea. We don't even know.
But
she took a plea.
Never went to trial.
So the investigation, Eric, the investigation into this would have went into her medical records, would have went into the neighbors, people who knew them and stuff like that.
Yeah, they would have likely had lots because she was going into the hospital and going to doctors frequently.
Right, but before she took a plea, they would have known all. I don't think they would have allowed her to make such a nice plea if they didn't know the full background of this.
I don't think, but the information didn't come out until the defense brought it up. I don't think law enforcement.
You don't think the cops investigated this at all?
I think they were handed the investigation once these two individuals said, "Yeah, we killed her and mailed the knife to ourselves."
I would hope they would. Yeah, I agree with Jerry.
So the cops didn't do any investigation at all. They didn't know anything about her past medical history or anything like that.
We don't know. We don't know the full details of how much they actually knew about her past medical history because not all of it's been released. And supposedly some records
have been give the cops a little bit more credit.
Well, supposedly records have been destroyed in Hurricane Katrina. So they wouldn't have been able to get records anyway.
What about the neighbors? What about the neighbors? They get destroyed too? Friends in school that she grew up with and stuff like that. They get destroyed too?
They all went up in the hurricane.
They were... Jerry,
maybe it was a tornado and they all went.
They were given this investigation on a platter, Jerry. You had an easy manipulated individual and then Gypsy who just gave the cops what they wanted.
How soon did she sign that plea deal? Right?
I don't know, but TikTok probably knows. I'm sure somebody on TikTok probably knows the answer to how soon she signed the plea deal after she was arrested.
She had to take some time. She had to get an attorney. They had to discuss certain things.
They're going to discuss strategy. I mean, look, if the evidence is strong enough to where, I'm assuming she took a plea, obviously, to either a voluntary manslaughter or some lesser. It wasn't premeditated murder, obviously. It probably wasn't second. She got 10 years?
10 years.
Is that what she got?
10 years.
So 10 years tells me she probably pled out to, I don't know if was Minnesota, right? Missouri, sorry. Missouri. I always get Missouri.
Montana, Missouri.
Yeah, well, it starts with an M. It's like, damn it. M. So it's either first degree, second. Most states have some iteration of this. First, premeditation. Second degree, you have to have intent to kill. Third, or voluntary manslaughter. Technically, it's like a negligent homicide. You didn't intend to kill, but somebody died as a consequence of your actions. And then there's involuntary, right? Which would be like a misdemeanor manslaughter or something like that. But states have variations of that. So I'm assuming she took maybe a voluntary. Is that correct?
So right. July 2016, they said, is when she signed the plea deal.
Yeah, what did she plead to, though? She had to plead
she pled to homicide.
Okay.
I believe it was second degree.
Second degree.
If I remember correctly.
Yeah, she listed because she had requested her boyfriend at the time to kill her mother. So because there was no manslaughter there. That was
that's correct. So that goes to the issue of intent
to anything.
Yeah, because you have to have intent to kill for
right.
someone.
But you could plead to anything.
Yeah, but she pled to second degree.
Right. And she probably, and the 10 years were probably on the table. So she knew if I plead to this, I'm going to get 10 years.
That's a pretty good deal, actually. I mean,
look, I'm not going to lie, guys. If I was facing a charge and they came to me and said, look, we'll give you 10 years if you just tell us, I'm going to tell you whatever the hell you want me to tell you. 10 years or I'm going to face life in prison.
But it has to be corroborated. It can't be, I'm going to tell you whatever you want. It has to be corroborated.
Well,
I mean,
that's
it
the
has
thing
to
is,
be.
again, we don't know how much was actually cooperated. Oh, we have to, professionals, Jerry, we have to assume the police did their job. I'm not going to say the cops did not do their job. As a professional, I have to assume the cops did their job. Just as I do in any other investigation, I'm going to assume the cops did their job thoroughly. I'm going to assume the DA did their job thoroughly. Until I see evidence otherwise, I'm not going to make an opinion and say they didn't do their job. But
Right.
when a case is handed to you, and Jerry, you and I both know from experience. Let's talk about experience. You work in cases you and I have worked. We have seen cases where detectives get a case that's handed to them and they stop the investigation. It does happen.
Well, then not every detective is a star. Not every cop is a star. Not every defense attorney is a star. There are people in jail just because they had lousy defense attorneys. I mean, and not every prosecutor is a star. I mean, but you know, until I got to believe that the cops did the job. There was a dead person there. You know, we take that a little seriously, and you know, whatever she's told them, I'm sure they had to go find out to see whether it was the truth or not. You know, that's the simple stuff.
I don't think she disclosed the medical system at that time. I think that didn't come out till the defense brought it out. I don't think detectives knew about that stuff.
About what?
All her medical backstory. That didn't come out till the defense brought it out. She was the one that brought that out after the defense and HBO and all the other stuff.
That would make sense.
Why
because
is that though?
Yeah, that would be their defense. But when
you watch her interviews,
but when they were negotiating. When they were negotiating this deal,
it probably came out. Yeah, in the deal, it would have. Oh, yeah,
and then the cops had to corroborate it. I mean, that's all I'm saying. They're not just going to take the defense attorney's word for it.
Oh yeah, they definitely had to verify that. If just assume you're a prosecutor, right? The prosecutor is not going to offer some sweet deal unless there's mitigation, and that's what we're talking about here. Is we're talking about mitigating facts. So again, from the legal side, if I was a defense attorney, which I rarely am, I have defended people before, but I rarely, but I have. And so, we're looking for mitigation in addition to looking for dispositive, facts, things to sort of, essentially show that the defendant didn't commit the crime. But yeah, mitigation is something that is obviously something that is going to be looked at. The defense attorney's going to look for those mitigating facts. And so something like this, like years of abuse, just like in domestic violence cases where, you have a battered woman, right? And it can be a battered man, but just to say battered woman who endures years of abuse, that abuse cycle and that can trigger all kinds of sort of these fear-based reactions where they can have self-defense as a possible, right? Maybe an imperfect defense, but they can assert that, and that can be certainly mitigating. And so, yeah, they're going to. I absolutely would be certain that that's what they did in this case. This probably was shown as mitigating, and the prosecutor and the defense counsel are working this out, saying, okay, look, if we go to trial, we're going to put all this on, right? Defense is telling them all these mitigating facts are going to go on, and a jury who is sympathetic to that may very well.
They only need one.
Correct.
Only one juror, right?
Correct. All you need is one.
Yeah.
And then they got a hung jury, right? If they can't get it committed, and then they got to retry it. And it's a big mess. So
any attorney that gets you 10 years on a second-degree murder charge is a great attorney. And let's just be honest with that. Out of
he's a good attorney with a great case. So.
Well, that too. But out of the tens of thousands of hours of cases I've worked, and the case I've worked, Jerry, 10 years on a murder case. It's a really good deal.
Yeah.
Especially when usually the minimum mandatory for secondary murder is life in prison.
25 to life.
25. If you're taking a plea, it's 25.
10 years is quite a downward departure from that. So there must have been a lot of mitigating stuff there. But again, we don't know everything, so I can't give a perspective. And I'm watching the TikTok comments here as we're talking. I'm watching the TikTok comments here. A lot of people are like, oh, you guys didn't research the case. You don't know anything. It's funny because, again, I had to keep reminding people that we have other cases. We're taking the time to talk about a case that has a lot of interest and give a professional perspective, a lot of questions that we see. But, we don't have time to dig into Gypsy's case. Look, she's already been convicted. She's served her time. We are not going to reopen somebody's case and do an investigation. That's not what we are here for. We're here to educate about true crime, psychology, what we do as investigators, and all of this stuff, and we do it with a fresh set of eyes. I don't want to read what everybody else has already done on TikTok. We want to look at Gypsy from our own perspective, and answer the questions that we're seeing, and one of the questions I keep seeing a lot is double jeopardy. And people keep saying, well, how can we get Gypsy to go back and get arrested? How can we get her charged again? Can she be charged federally? And these are all great questions. And Craig, I know you're an attorney. Doesn't mean you're an attorney at everything, but some stuff you had to take the bar exam.
Yeah, I had to take the California bar, which is actually arguably one of the most difficult bar exams in the country. Well, New York and California actually have the hardest bar exams, at least historically. Double jeopardy is obviously it's embedded, and all that just means is that you cannot try a defendant, obviously, for the same, and this is important, the same crime twice or again, right? So once they've either been acquitted or in this case, there was a plea deal taken and she has pled out to this charge, they cannot charge her again for anything that would connect to that fact pattern that connected to that crime. Now, it gets weird and nuanced when we talk about finding some other crime, perhaps, that may be a product of this enterprise, whatever, the totality of the facts. If it wasn't part of that charge, in other words, the elements of that crime, then there could be the possibility of another, filing, right, of a separate charge or a different charge, as long as it doesn't comport with those facts connected to that second degree murder conviction or murder plea deal that she took. So that's how double jeopardy would play, could come into play here. She couldn't be tried again, obviously, for this, for the facts related to the murder, but it could be something related to that, maybe a gun charge, again, something that she was not originally charged for. Well, whatever, but then you got statute of limitations issues, right?
Let's start a new rumor.
Anything, statute of limitations.
Stabbed him with a gun.
We're talking about a long time ago. So, yeah, it gets messy with this. It gets messy. Yeah.
Well, I'm glad you clarified that, because people on social media, the reason why they wanted us to dig up the facts of the case, because they think that she can be re-prosecuted. And we've been continually saying, no, this case is done. So we're done here. What they are getting involved in is they want to know if she's violating the terms and conditions of her parole.
Oh.
Many people have an opinion on that. It's not quite as easy as you think. I'm in California, so look, I see violations of parole like every day and nothing is going on. No one's doing nothing about that, okay? So, they're calling the PO and be like, she was talking to so-and-so, she shouldn't have been.
Yeah.
And people think they just can make a phone call and be like, you need to send her back, as if going back to prison is. So maybe Eric can speak on that a little bit.
Looks like Eric had some comments.
Just call the police and take her back.
Really good question that ties in what we were talking about, but I just lost my train of thought because Dana, I have ADHD, and so I'm all over here. Things splashing, I got Law and Order in the background. Somebody asked a really good question so we talked about double jeopardy. Somebody asked about perjury in regards to her plea deal. So let's say, for example, because I think this is a really good question, because I don't even know the answer to the question. Let's say, for example, it never does come out that the facts of the case, the evidence was wrong. It happens. Let's say she lied during her plea deal. Can they go back and get her for perjury?
Depends. And so for one, proving perjury is difficult, right? But it can be done. In most states, in most jurisdictions, perjury is a felony and it's punished by, imprisonment or in the state prison. But they have to establish that under oath, right, that she entered testimony of some sort under oath that was in fact false, right? So it has to be proven beyond a reasonable doubt, just like any other offense, that something that she asserted was in fact false. But then we run into, again, a statute of limitations issue in the context of, this is a state court, I'm assuming. So I'm not a Missouri attorney, so I would not know what their statute of limitations is generally for that. But generally, there is a statute of limitations for most statutes, except murder in most jurisdictions.
Which has
not have a statute. Correct. And there's some other, sex crimes and stuff that they've expanded this in the recent years. But for perjury, I know there's a statute of limitations on that. We'd have to research it. Maybe Dana will do that real quick, and then we'll know. 3 years. 3 years from when, again, when that was uttered in court. So it has to be uttered under oath. And, theoretically, could that happen? Well, no, because it's been longer than 3 years. Right. So they wouldn't be able to bring that, that charge generally.
And to answer Dana's question about the probation and parole thing, again, and I talk about my experience as a corrections officer dealing with people that were on probation and parole. It is very, very hard to get somebody violated on anything. I mean, 9 times out of 10, typically somebody gets violated because they violate an order of the judge, or they piss dirty. 9 times out of 10 it's because they piss dirty. If you don't piss dirty, most time your PO doesn't care. As long as you're checking in with your PO, you're going out of town like you're supposed to, you're checking in with them, you're showing up for your scheduled parole, your parole visitations, they don't really care what you do. Because even if you do get violated, it's not easy to get you locked back up. Like, people think that you just automatically get locked back up and go right back to prison. No, you have to have a hearing. You're usually released back out on bond pending your parole violation hearing. 9 times out of 10, the judge doesn't give 2 shits about your technical violation, because usually it's just an overzealous PO, and usually the violations aren't very serious. Unless you violate the law, or you're endangering people, or you're doing drugs, most parole officers are not going to violate you. Now, if you start getting that thing where you're breaking the law, you're becoming reckless, then you're risking getting violated. But it's not an easy process whatsoever, and I've seen it many times before. I mean, and we've even heard it. We've seen, so-and-so is out on parole, out on probation, they committed another crime, because it's so hard to get people violated,
Yeah, when they're violated, oftentimes if they do have to do any time, it's generally limited, and they do go back to prison, but it's generally for a short duration. Well, in California, I mean, I'm familiar with the California system, so I worked in corrections for a while. And not as a correctional officer, but I know the system, and most people that get violated on parole, it's 3056 in California. That's the statute. They, if they go back for like 6 months or something, or 12 months, and then they just let them right back out again. So it's not something that's gonna. People might be asking, well, if we get them violated, we can send them back to prison for another 10 years. That's not the reality of that.
You would go back and serve your sentence.
No, that's not the reality of that at all.
And if she EOSs, like for her, she EOSs like what, a year? So if you EOS in a year, no PO is going to waste their time. Somebody who EOSs in a year. You know what I'm saying? Like, okay, if you're out on parole and you're on parole for the rest of your life for 25 years, you have a good chance of getting violated. But if your parole's up in a year, nobody's going to violate you. They don't care. And that's just the hard truth about corrections. Like, I'm sorry to say it, but POs are overworked. I mean, that's just how it is. They have to worry about, more serious offenders. Whether they're looking at me, nothing.
We're looking at you, Eric.
Well, if they're overworked, if they put somebody in jail, that's one less client they have to worry about, right? So then they lessen their workload.
They'll give them, at least in California, they'll just give them another.
Yeah, but they still got to testify in court, Jerry. They got to write a
report.
I'm teasing. It's a lot of work.
I don't know why people think it's so easy for her to just bounce back to prison, like you just explained, the whole judicial process. And even if you go to jail, and I see people every week in jail who are violating the terms and conditions, they go before the judge and they're usually released. I mean, or not even that. It's a book and release. They don't even stay overnight at the jail. So
I
think there's a misconception about the justice system, although we'd like to think it works the way we see it on TV. And we're just here providing how it really works in the real world. And it doesn't even mean we agree with it. We're just saying this is what it looks like.
Yeah, this is reality.
This is reality. And it may not be fair or just.
even though someone's on probation or parole, they still have due process rights. If you're going to violate them, that's going to trigger they have a due process right to be a notice and opportunity to be heard. So that's where the hearing comes in. So, you don't just automatically just like, we're sending it right back. There's going to be no process or, availability of that person to, have a right to be heard. And again, this is in most jurisdictions. I don't know about some, maybe the southern states are different. They may not have.
We're a lot different.
They may have different rules, down there, but most places don't.
Jerry Lyons, you want to wrap it up with any wise words of advice for any of the listeners out there with all your experience?
Give us a marriage
100 years ago. No.
100 years of experience.
A little bit more. So, when we were talking about, and I'll do this real quick. I thought of another case, and we were talking about when we said good attorneys, bad attorneys, and stuff like that. I had a case where a guy met a girl on Christmas Day on a dating site. She had a guy in the back of the car. She had to drop him off somewhere. The guy says, "Yeah, okay." He gets in the car. They drive down the block. The guy in the back of the car shoots him 4 times in the head. Right? They did it to rob him. All he had was $1 because you have ATM cards now, right? So the cops catch them, and they have all this evidence. They catch them. And they give the girl, they make a deal with the girl, 20 years, twice as much as Gypsy, but 20 years, but she has to testify against the guy. The guy goes to trial, and he's found not guilty. The state never put the girl on the stand. Now, how does a prosecutor not put the only eyewitness to a murder on the stand? It could be another podcast. But what I'm saying is, so you have good attorneys, you have bad attorneys. Now, this is evidently a bad prosecutor.
Yeah, that's like a major, that's not even like an oversight. I don't even know how to respond to it.
I was shocked.
And again, it's always, you always have to worry about the issue of credibility, right? When a co-defendant is testifying against, another defendant.
They had the gun, they had the bloody clothes, they had
corroboration. So the statement then is just, icing on the cake, so to speak, and would have probably got them over the finish line.
Okay. I just, when I was talking about good attorneys, bad attorneys, this popped into my head and I figured I say it. But as far as leaving you with words of wisdom, I don't have any, So, I just I enjoy this. I want to thank you for letting me be on. I loved my time being a cop, being a detective. I love investigations, and that's why I still do them. And because I just like it. I just like it. But I appreciate you having me on here.
Working with me keeps him young.
I had a full head of hair when I met Eric.
He did have a full head of hair. He had a full head of hair until he met me, and then when he met me, then his hair fell off. His hair fell off, so did mine. The sides.
There's medications for that now.
Yeah, right. But this is the first time I met with 2 psychologists, and they didn't bill me and give me a bad, whatever. So,
Jerry, come hang out with us again soon.
I'd love to.
Yeah, that was
great. Just ask.
Thank you so much, guys.
You're welcome.
Thanks for listening. For episode details and merch, check out killerpsychologistpodcast.com. And for forensic services, you can book online at psychologydr.com. That's psychologydoctor.com.